Hello and welcome to a series of Feed Your Faith segments on the normal Christian life. My name is Ian White, and in these segments we're looking at what St Paul describes as the fruit of the Spirit. And if you want to see them in your own Bible, you can find them in Galatians chapter 5 verses 22 and 23. Well, today in this segment we're going to be thinking about the fruit of the Spirit as goodness. The Bible talks about the Holy Spirit as being God with us and in us in the here and now. And when the Holy Spirit is released in our lives in a meaningful way, we find ourselves able to exercise goodness in a way which we may not have been able to do previously. And that's part of the fruit of the Spirit working its way out in our lives, ideally. Now, if kindness, that was our previous segment, is the attitude of heart that always wants to benefit or do the best for other people, then goodness is the activity that brings that about. However, goodness has a bit of a ropey press. There are some deep misconceptions surrounding it. You see, for many people, goodness is just a throwaway concept. Between 1998 and 2002, the BBC ran a sitcom about an Asian family, and it poked fun at the racism of the time. It was called Goodness Gracious Me. I'm not sure I can do the accent quite like they could. But it was hilariously funny, and as many comedies do, it exposed deeper issues that are in society at the time. But basically the word goodness was just a throwaway comment that happened to land in the title and was part of a catchphrase that they used often. More seriously, we sometimes see or hear people asking, well, why bother to be good, whatever goodness looks like? So long as I don't hurt anyone, can't I get away with just being a little bit bad? After all, they say, and I've heard this said to me, it's rather fun being a bit edgy or radical or breaking the rules a bit or challenging the norms I don't particularly like. Now, well, yeah, there are certainly times when norms need to be challenged. I sometimes detect in that attitude a certain pride in being a sort of self-styled minor revolutionary rather than actually seeing a change in society. There was an advert for dairy cream many years ago, and we'd never get away with it now. It was advertising cream as naughty but nice. So goodness can be thought of as a concept we can dispense with, and we're sometimes encouraged to admire people who don't show it. Now, for other people, goodness is pretty much all there is to being a Christian. A Christian person is just a good person and nothing more. So if I want to be a Christian, all I have to do is be good to my neighbour and perhaps go to church at Christmas and Easter to maintain some kind of nodding acquaintance with God. And when they finally meet God, they'll say, I've been good enough, haven't I? Unfortunately, God, speaking through Isaiah, makes an uncomfortable observation about this approach. And he says, your righteous deeds, your goodness, look to me like a load of filthy rags. And a much deeper cleansing is therefore needed in order to be on side with me. Now, for other people, goodness is a derisory term. We sometimes used to hear people referred to as a goody-goody, and it was a term of derision. More recently, the last decade or so, the phrase, I'm good, meaning goodness just means okay, has become much more common. So if someone asks me, how are you? I might say, oh, I'm good. And that means little more than I'm okay. Of course, it can also mean I've had enough. So if you're offered another cake with your latte, you might say, oh, no, I'm good. Or you might not. So let's try and get a handle on goodness by considering the goodness of God himself as the Bible reveals it. And then in our next segment, we'll ask how that works out in our own lives. And the first thing I'd want to notice in this respect is that God's goodness changes us. At one point in his life, Moses had real misgivings about whether he was capable of leading the children of Israel into the promised land. And he came up with several excuses for God as to why he shouldn't do it. And then Moses said at the end of this kind of argument, he said, okay, look, Lord, now show me your glory. And the Lord said to him, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, but you won't see my face. And so God hides Moses in a cleft in the rock and passes by him. And what happens next is significant. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. So intense was the glory of God's goodness that Moses' face glowed with it. In fact, the people were so frightened by this, they put a blanket over his head. And it seems to be saying that when we spend time drinking in God's presence, that presence will work its way out in our lives. When we drink in God's goodness and understand it in all its wonder, it has an effect that works its way out through us, and people notice. Secondly, God's goodness is a sign of his favour. One of the best known psalms in the book of Psalms is Psalm 23. And right at the end of it, you read these words. You, Lord, that's the Good Shepherd, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil and my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me or chase me, pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And the picture that David is conjuring up here is a picture of a banquet in which God himself is the host and you are the honoured guest. And as a result, his goodness, his mercy, his shalom will follow you. And that word carries the idea of being chased or pursued by God's love and goodness. And I also notice that God's goodness expects a response from us. Again, back in the Psalms. How can I repay the Lord for all his goodness to me? And then it's as if he comes up with an answer. I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. I will fulfill my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his people. So it seems here there is a twofold response to God's goodness. We call on the Lord because he's been good to us. We approach him in prayer or in conversation and we call on him. We take the initiative in calling on him. And secondly, we fulfill our vows, our promises. Our promises to live an authentic lifestyle. We seek to fulfill those for God's glory and for the benefit of other people. And then I notice that God's goodness is to be communicated in our families. Again, we're in Psalms now. Psalm 145 says this, they will celebrate your abundant goodness and joyfully sing about your righteousness. So who is they in this context? Well, the answer in the previous verse is this. One generation will commend your works to the other and tell of your mighty acts. So it's an earlier generation who is commending the goodness of the Lord at home or in conversation or on, walking down the street with their families. I want to speak well of the Lord in my home, for the benefit of my wife, my children, and now my grandchildren. I remember when our children were young and at home, I found there were times as a pastor when I had to be careful about what I said about God and especially about the church. If something ungodly or frustrating or downright sinful was happening among the people of God, it was very easy for me to be cynical or critical or carping about the church and even about God. And I was the pastor. My kids didn't need that. That was my problem, not theirs. And I wanted, and still want, to commend God's goodness to my family and anyone else who comes across our doorstep, because he is good and his mercy is everlasting. God bless you. Well, from here, you can like, you can subscribe, and you can share what you've just seen with some of your friends. So please do click around on the screen here and you'll find some other things that I hope will help to bolster your ministry. You could be anywhere in the world right now, but you're right here, and I appreciate that enormously. God bless you.